Welcome, everyone, to our 56th Salon. It's actually stunning. 56. I feel very proud of us. The title for our salon today is The Gifts of the International Feminist Movements in the Last 50 Years, hosted by the International Feminists for a Gift Economy. I'm Letecia Layson, your moderator. I'll give short introductions and then turn the mic over to Genevieve, Vaughan. So let's begin. First of all, I just want to say that we have asked our speakers to do a very big chore of reducing their experience, perhaps of 50 years, down to about a 20-minute segment. So we want you to understand that they're not going to be able to cover 50 years in detail, but they're going to give you the highlights. Genevieve Vaughan is an independent researcher who lives part-time in Italy and part-time in Texas. She is known as the founding mother of the maternal gift economy movement and founded the Foundation for a Compassionate Society, an all-women activist foundation that did great work during 1987 through 2005. She founded the Sekhmet Temple in Nevada, in the Nevada desert in 1982, and it still continues today. She co-created the network of the International Feminists for a Gift Economy that started in 2001, gathering women from around the world who often present with us here in our salons. And we're happy to have Peggy, Paola, and Angela when she joins us as part of that network. She has written several books. The foundational thesis of her work is forgiving. Her latest book is The Gift in the Heart of Language. Angela Miles, when she comes, is the founding member of Toronto Women for a Just and Healthy Planet. She is a professor emerita at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education and the University of Toronto, where she co-founded the International Women's Human Rights Education Summer Program. Her publications include Integrative Feminisms, Building Global Visions, and the edited collection In a Globalizing World, Transforming Equality, Development, Diversity, and Peace. Paola Melchiori is a feminist theorist, activist, and writer, author of books, videos, and articles on feminist issues. She's created nationally and international free spaces of critical thinking based on the model of free universities. Their main ideas is to develop and make visible new paradigms of knowledge based on women's ways of thinking and knowing, working in interdisciplinary ways across culture, classes, and specializations. She is the founder and past president of Women's Free University in Milan, and does research and Intercultural Education Association in Milan. So we are very happy to have her. And last but not least is Peggy Antrobus, a Caribbean feminist activist. Since the mid-1970s, she's been involved in programs to advance women's rights, first in the structure of government, later within the academy, and now as part of feminist-led global women's movement. She identifies her most significant and life-changing experience was being part of the network of feminists, researchers, activists from the economic South, advancing, developing alternatives, and women for a new era. DAWN was their acronym. Her interest in the gift economy came from the realization of the fact that much of what allows Caribbean people and economies to survive and thrive takes place outside of the market, grounded in social relations of reciprocity and solidarity. Welcome, all of you. So I'm going to turn over the mic to Genevieve, who's going to give us just a little overview and introduction. Welcome, Genevieve, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Letecia, and thank everybody for coming and being ready to speak about this, a very important theme in our society where we're living now with all the problems that we have. I'm very lucky because I moved to Italy in 1963 and got radicalized there and was in the anti-war movement and all of that against the Vietnam War. And then I found out about the rising current of feminism that was happening. And it was so fascinating. And I joined the feminist movement, the Italian feminist movement, and an international consciousness raising group. And it was so fabulous as a change of perspective that it really changed my life very much. And I came back to the United States and was here involved in feminism, and then did the peace tent at the UN Decade for Women final conference that they had in Nairobi. And that was, I think there were 12,000 women that were there at the conference. And it was a fabulous experience of international feminism, in that there were people from everywhere, women from all over, and able to speak to each other and compare lives and politics and thoughts and interpretations of the world. And since then, I have been able to go to, I don't know even how many, probably 20 other conferences of international women, both the Beijing conference that they had in 1995 from the UN Decade, let's say a commemoration conference. Again, even more women were there. And also many other conferences. There have been conferences called Women's Worlds that have been in various places, Africa, Korea, there was one, in Norway, there was another. And then besides all of the women's conferences, groups of us went as women, as feminists, as international feminists, to the other mixed conferences like the World Social Forum and other mixed conferences. So we have this has been an experience for me personally of a different world and a different worldview that I have experienced personally. And I wish everyone could have had an experience like that. But what we have is the legacy of those meetings and of all of the women that went there and who talked to each other and have created another worldview that is alternative to the patriarchal, war-based, money-based worldview that is creating a disaster now, both in our social lives, in our humanity, in our respect and care for one another, and in the planet. So I think it is so important that we understand and revisit this feminist movement, this international feminist movement, and learn from it and remember it even now. So thank you all so much for coming, and have a good experience of listening and thinking.
So just to let you know, we had Angela Miles was going to present North American feminisms here to start us off, but she'll have to do that when she enters into the room. And we are hoping, I hope you send energy her way so that she can get into the room. But we will actually turn the mic over to Paola, who's calling in from Italy.
Huh. Hello. So, I mean, it's hard to start because we had agreed with Angela that as we are a colony of the US, we would go second. So I think I have to change a moment the beginning of my presentation or my memories. So I will go by key points, what I think was so key for my generation in that time, in that particular context of Europe. And what I still see, in a way, I still think that some of these aspects are very actual also today. And I tell you that also by the way, that my internet says it's unstable. So if I take my video off, is because of that. Okay, so Europe came, in Europe, we came after the 70s were the years of real beginning of the feminism in Europe and in Italy. And it started reading a lot of American feminism, which started in the 60s. So we had we come after, and our group, so our feminists didn't come inside, didn't start inside the movement of civil rights, but it started inside a very strong leftist movement who was not struggling for civil rights, but to make a revolution. It was a Marxist idea of the class, who was the class who should have to take the power, the word, the leading. And with all what we know now, so now we always think, say in a way, laughing, that wall, that Berlin Wall, protected many dreams for all of us. We didn't know what was going, but we need a lot of theories that were going on about there. And so until all the events in Bulgaria, in Czechoslovakia, etc., we didn't know what was really happening. And so the idea of a communist society was very strong, and exploded in the 70s. It was not an hippie movement. It was a very social-based, class-based movement, which makes already a difference from the American. So you'll hear some things that make us different from the American, because I thought that America would come first. So you think about that. The second aspect was that there was a strong psychoanalytic research on sexuality and sexes, and also that was incorporated in the European feminists, mainly the Italian and the French, very much. So we started from a different framework, socially and theoretically. What I think was a gift for us, the beginning, for women in Europe and women in Italy a lot, was the invisibilization of the natural destiny of women. So the possibility to think, for my age, 18 years old, that my natural destiny to be married, to get children, perhaps to study a little bit, but not too much. Could be in reality not a destiny, but a social construct that could be challenged, I think was the first gift of feminism for my generation of women. Second is the identification of the form of domination that the female oppression has, which also is, I try to highlight, which is different a little bit from the American feminism. The depth of the oppression that goes through the bodies, not only through sexuality, but through a certain oppression that is without name and is so natural in every day that women who live like the people oppressed by the color of their skin take it as normal, was challenged for the first time, and also was challenged and put in question what they call, Virginia Woolf would call it the hypnotic relationship that was linking the victim to the power. So this was the second, I think, gift from feminist questions. The third was, to do that, we needed to identify these oppressions. And I think there was a very important book made by 5 women in Italy that was called The Consciousness of Being Exploited, which really put together these two souls that I was talking about, the souls of the inside the left. And because in that book, it was the issue of sexuality, it was the issue of oppression, cultural oppression, yes, but it was also the issue of the unpaid work through sexuality, through the marriages, all what became the unwaged, how is it in English? The unwaged work that women silently do every day for love. And all the question in this was very, as also proposing, it didn't continue that, but proposing a payment for the work of women and a list of all the work that women do in the house. Now it's normal, common sense, but at that time, I tell you, it was not common sense, not only, but it was natural that women do all this for love. And women didn't question that, so the possibility to see all this in a different way was absolutely stunning, and opening roads, opening freedom, opening questions. And in a way, it was an anticipation of the analysis of social reproduction, which today we call social reproduction, because we have a larger view. But at that time, it was the unpaid work that women do in the houses. And also it was very clear already there, because we had some women already working, that the emancipation, so become work, going out of the houses to work, which would give autonomy, independence, etc., which is absolutely true, but would have become very quickly a double burden, if not approached in a different way. So in a way, this was very strong in Italy. And this was the first part, which put the women's movement very much working with the left, until the women recognized that there was this cultural oppression. So they were also taken by granted, and they're doing the same thing, the domestic work of, printing, all these things in the social movements. And paradoxically, I anticipated, in the social forums, we at the beginning of the social forums, the one we went in the 2000s, we refound the same thing. So we refound the deep patriarchal structure of the left. So this was the second part, was to understanding the depth of our slavery psychologically. This became visible through this third invention, which was the conscious raising methodology. So the conscious raising methodology was the way through which women could take the voice, could analyze all this, their dependence, their position, around kitchen tables, so without any recognition informally. And this was advocated as, you should have a little bit more time for the non-first language English speaker, but anyway, never mind. So we could identify our dependence through this methodology, but it was more than that. It was revendicating that this knowledge was knowledge that has a scientific rigor, sociologically or formally or academically speaking. So it was from the beginning the contrast with the academy. This is scientific and has a rigor on its own. And the second thing, so this goes to the, not to challenge the notion of the formation of knowledge, of what kind of production of knowledge is recognized in the academies, and what is another knowledge born by the women's experience. And from there also, it opened the road for researching what was called a genealogy, of mothers. So women who had alone, paying with their lives, paid with a high price to try to affirm a different way of thinking, a different way of writing, a different way of knowing. And in that, a lot of very early, what came out was the scientific body, how women like that were collected by my friend Fox Keller, scientists really were completely cancelled and completely had an incredible strong role in new discovery, like the DNA, but nothing was attributed to them until in that time. Another, always from the conscious raising, we moved very quickly, and I'm talking in Europe in general, from the research for equality to the difference. So the idea of being included in all the bodies that form the democratic or knowledge system in a system was quickly discovered as a trap, the trap of equality. So in Europe, not in Northern Europe, which experimented, by the way, all the equality paths and traps also, but in all the Southern Europe, the looking for inclusion, looking for equality became very quickly looking for differences. What makes us different and gives us the possibility to propose a different paradigms of knowledge, different set of the world, starting from what then the Americans would call the feminist standpoint or something like that. But the idea that women have to find their difference and have to be able to build a system of knowledge that keeps this clearly at the centrum was very strong in that moment. So this aspect opened to a certain vision of education, a vision of a relationship among women that questioned, because we were in this left very quickly, this issue. All this research that was coming through the students in the middle class, we can say, but what is the meaning of that? What can be the value for poor women, for other women that were not students, couldn't have this privilege? So very quickly we experimented having very egalitarian situation of conscious raising inside schools, and there was an incredible experiment in Italy, but I don't have the time to tell this, 150 hours, where women and of all classes met and tried to see what they had in common. And this was very, took in a way out Italian feminism, and I think also the French, from this being a classic, white middle class feminist. So very quickly we start, the people who are like me working in the international development, for example, started questioning, what are we doing there? How are we looking at these women who know their situation? Instead, we have to go there and bring ideas of development completely conceived in other countries who don't know anything about what is happening there. So we question very quickly the power relations, not about race, but about the power of the North over the South that was in the time of decolonization and the struggles for their own autonomy and independence. So these points that I have quoted are I would say the main issues that we were dealing then, and I think reframe how they can be reframed today is still a very interesting.
It's volume. That's nice. You gotta find out. I can find out.
Can you please the last issue I want to talk? Do I have 3 minutes?
Yes.
Diane, yes. It's about politics and institutional politics. One of the results of the conscious raising and the research for difference was that we thought that to keep our difference alive, we had to stay out of any institutional involvement, because the institutions were so strong at that time, academy, I'm talking about academy and politics, that would have, we would have lost, it was too early to be able to make a difference in those institutions. So I would say that here, one of the interesting things about Europe is the different destiny of the Northern Europe. So Norway, all the Norway, Finland, that through the quota try to experiment the fact that having a critical mass in politics can make a difference, and the South, who didn't think that this was possible, and this can be discussed, the results of that. But what is still very much alive, because today I would say that only the Spanish women found a real middle path that respects the autonomy and the political landscape. We have today 3 women that are leading Europe, and these 3 women don't make any difference in feminist sense. So that visibility of this problem, of this issue, is the same that we were discussing at that point. What we do when from the private spaces that have changed life, has changed education, has changing the vision of the world in many aspects. What happens when we go to an institutional strong that can make a difference? So we have examples very interesting, like in Iceland, for example. But I think this team is very open today, and also because of the war. So if I can continue, but I think I'm out of my time, or not. Okay, so I think I would like with you to evaluate at the end the consequences of the approaches I have mentioned in very key points, and see which ones are still alive as unsolved approaches in a way which could be comparable to our times.
Thank you, Paola. Thank you so much. I think it's really important to actually have these different perspectives, the way that feminism sort of rose out and took over the, the landscape. And I thought it was very interesting that you said that Europe and feminism was a colony of the Americas. So that made me laugh.
The beginning, but that is why going first without the other framework, I think is not a very, I mean, it was a damage to the whole picture. So.
Well, we have Angela who has joined us.
Yeah, that was fascinating. I heard some discussions about the European relationship to the U.S., and I think that's interesting in terms of what I was going to discuss. I am going to talk about my own experience in England as a student, 65 to 68, and then moving to Canada, and my sense of the Canadian and US connections, and what's really, really important about the movement, I think, in North America, the contributions, the gifts from North America, and the context. I really wish I could see something on the computer or whatever. Anyway, and I probably don't have 20 minutes. I've probably taken up 10 of all your precious time by now. My idea is to talk about my formation politically and my sense of myself as a woman, because I think that's one of the very, very important contributions of the particular way that the North American movement developed, is that sense of woman and what that means. Then I want to talk about the context, the spirit of the time then, which was very, very significant there and interesting in terms of the UK and the US in some of the different, and Canada in some of the differences. And then about what it is that I think made for such an incredible energy, yeast of rising feminism in North America and in particular the US, which washed over us and lifted our boat, so to speak. So I grew up with a mother who had been 5 years older than her younger brother, who was the apple of both her parents' eyes. And she was determined that would not happen to me and my younger brother, who was 2.5 and much more charming than me. And as she mentioned this to me, she protected me constantly, so I wouldn't have to be babysitting and I wouldn't be number 2. My father also really, we clicked. We really got on. He valued me. He certainly respected me and loved me. And so as an older sister, I had a very unusual upbringing. Now, my mother resisted patriarchy and by insisting she was a person. And she absolutely refused. She had respect for women and for herself, but she didn't want to be talking about women things, feminist things. She knew all about the world. She knew how it worked, and she was a person. And I think so she worked hard for me to be a little person. She loved it that I didn't particularly like dolls and I didn't particularly like shopping. She thought that was great. So there was a way in which when I went off to university, I was I think, unusually didn't have a sense of myself. Wasn't even conscious of thinking of myself as a person. This question of being a woman was not a factor, even in the way it is with, So anyway, I went into my classes, and the Labour Party had just won an election when I went to university, and I had worked for the first time politically electing Harold Wilson. And what I noticed was nothing changed when the Labour Party came in. It didn't make that much of a change. It was big. It was actually a huge change, but actually it didn't seem like it was making a big difference. So we went up to the university, and I went to the freshman opening stalls. They were always trying to recruit new students to their groups. And when I happened across some of the political groups, I got into a chat, and I said, it doesn't seem that parliamentary change it makes much difference. That's probably not going to work. That's not enough. So all the left groups grabbed me to recruit me, and I found them interesting and so on. And they right away they wanted to recruit me to run in the election for student council, because apparently back then women weren't running, women didn't run, women had no reason to run, and if a woman stood, she always got elected. So I got quickly recruited to left politics, student unions, and so on and so forth. And I was interested in it, and I was good at debating, and I enjoyed it, and I liked the politics, and was learning more about it. And it was interesting. Anyway, there's a lot of anecdotes about that. But the fact of the matter is, throughout my whole university, I was involved in politics with the men. I had a radical poet husband, so he wasn't, or not husband, boyfriend, he wasn't involved. So I was there myself. And as these were political times, sit-ins about whether they would up the international student fees, supporting women workers on strike in a clothing mill, putting out a radical newspaper, local newspaper. And US students, when they came in, they were coming from a very, 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 very dynamic and countercultural context. Civil rights developing, Vietnam War being resisted and threatening draft dodging, Cuba just off their coast in 1959, and the tensions there, McCarthyism beginning to be resisted. I mean, I could talk a lot longer about that moment then. Youth culture, counterculture, and the black movement. I mean, this was a moment in the U.S. of major cultural contestation and challenge. The Cold War was there. Peace movements were anti-nuclear movements, and then of course anti-poverty movements and so on. Now those were really changing in a deep way. And Canada was impacted by draft dodgers from the U.S. who could come into Canada and then apply for asylum, and of course many and also deserters, which very proud moment for Canada that was open, and the Canadian context when I got there. In Toronto, it's Ontario, nearest to the border. There was a lot of anti-war organizing there as well. So just to say, this was an amazing moment, and that was absolutely crucial. Let me give you my summary of my points before I go into any anecdotes. This was an amazing moment, and the Royal Commission reports in US and Canada came out mainly organized by women who were in national organized women's groups of professionals and university women, trade union women, church women, and women who had been active feminists in an earlier period in the 30s, and also to a certain extent post-war around the UN proceedings. That was 61 in the US, early, although civil rights was beginning and so on and so forth. 67 in Canada, which meant that there was more of a movement, grassroots movement or whatever happening at that time. The impact of those was huge because it was such a tumultuous time of change culturally and politically, and because I think the Black movement and the Black pride, beginnings of gay pride, was very important in terms of making pride as women a framework, a political framework to affirm womanhood, was very much influenced by and Black feminists. And I've got very interesting quotes about this, writing and saying, listen, we have Black pride, we need women pride as well now, all of us, etc. So that was the space into which feminism came in North America, and as I say, the hotbed being the U.S. And that was there were the women I mentioned, the professional women, and the women who, and then there were the who came later, the women from all those progressive groups, into the hippies and youth culture and supporting liberations abroad and resisting, anti-nuclear, supporting draft dodgers. Those women came later. There was an immediate impact of that on the grassroots feminists, the feminists who hadn't been politically available, the feminists who had to learn a sad lesson that when you were having sexual liberation, there were problems for women. Everybody was for liberation, but not for women's liberation. Those women also brought a lot into the movement, and they were the women who just were energized by the books that were going around, by the groups they were founding, by the as women. They were absolutely autonomous right from the beginning. The vast majority of feminists in North America happened from their living rooms, from their workplaces, from the hospitals where they gave their birth. They saw the lives around them, and they were revolutionaries like that. And they formed groups, and they did it. They put notices up in supermarkets, and they got together at work. They did it with their neighbors. They were incredibly open and free in terms of, and they understood the personal was political, and the cultural was very key. And it was based on, as I say, that sense of, hey, we exist, we're connected. The ones who came from political groups, some were autonomous and actually stepped back and said, we can't rely on any other theory. We're not going to become, not going to add women here. We're going to change it. This has got to change. There's a deeper change here than being accepted, being equal. So they varied. Some were caucuses and carried on trying to push, and some pushed, but pushed in ways that wasn't contained in quite the same way. So those two groups, and to me, it was the autonomy of feminism and the huge impact of women who were actually not buying and didn't even know maybe what the basic political presumptions were. Books, of course, were very important. People name off the same books that actually people read and suddenly realized, what life was like, and that other women shared their problems. Very, very important was the circulation of things that very, very interesting articles came out of group discussion, group processes, self-reflection on the practice and what was, and so on. And those were circulated to all the kind of groups that were going on and all over the place. You had to retype them all to get a Gesketter copy and roll them off a machine. And they had to be really good because they took a lot of work. And the really good ones circulated quite widely and were very, very impactful. So it's the autonomy of that basis there. And it's the fact that it was very much about women, seeing the work that women did, seeing the ways that women are blamed for everything, seeing the way that women are set up against each other, but nobody's winning. And seeing just sort of very basic principles, absolutely essential principles that and consciousness raising as a group, as a concept, as a practice that was very widespread. Anybody could have a group, 8 people, or you'll get little brochures about, oh hey, 8, maybe between 8 and 15. You get people reflecting on it. Those things were set up that every women sat around, and some you might think maybe it would be a group of neighbors, and you might name co-workers, but amazing how diverse women are in fairly, what their childhoods are like, whether they're immigrated, if what their husband does, even within groups that might be considered not very diverse, the diverse experiences and what you could learn from how other women took situations and were doing it. So the basic principles of essential autonomous feminism that was women affirming, and not just we need to be equal, we need to be recognized as equal to the men in the ways that men are understood and what's considered to be important. That was right at the heart of it. And I've taken too long to get on and to read out any of the quotes there, but it's amazing in the 1970s and late 60s how every group of women that self-defined or named themselves lesbian feminists, black feminists, Chicana feminists, disabled women, prostituted women, when they spoke and wrote, they wrote from their place, their specific priorities, their critiques, their analyses, lesbian women, and they all wrote and spoke as feminists and as the center of their feminism. This was a multi-centered movement, and all of the activists in that early period were organizing themselves in whatever way they chose, with whatever group they chose to be in, autonomous. Now, some of your socialist feminists might not be autonomous, and some of your anarchist feminists or whatever weren't autonomous. Liberal feminists did not call themselves liberal feminists. A load of them were autonomous liberal feminists. Numbers of them, probably most of the liberal feminists were autonomous because they weren't getting their feminism from their liberalism, or they didn't have the illusion they were. So the vast majority of feminists in the movement in North America were autonomous. Well, the point being to say that I think what I was going to get to was all the things that we learned from each other. One of the things I think is very important if we're moving to discuss globally, in the US, all those groups of women I mentioned, of different kinds of groups, from political groups, not politically active, all of them, not Angela Miles, because I didn't. I knew they were women, and there were women. They had female subcultures. What they thought of the male boss, or what they might say about men not being able to be sent to the supermarket because they bought everything. They didn't know the list, or how they were too impatient. There was a sense of female culture. What there wasn't a sense of resistance before the feminist movement in North America. What changed for women, I think, was realizing that they were women, because when in liberal context, when women have options, you have to try to make sure they don't realize they're women in a real way. So there were the female cultures, but not a sense of women. In other parts of the world, where things were more clearly gendered and there were more restrictions on women, all over the world, women knew they were women. That wasn't a big deal. And I think in North America, the fact that the big deal, I think that's what North American feminists thought was important for to all these women to learn, was that they're women, and they already knew that. But it was still important, the message that it didn't have to be the way it was. And I think a lot of learning, important learning, happened around what it meant to be a woman internationally and globally. Anyway, I'm really sorry I can't see you all in a very consistent way.
Thank you, Angela. That was really wonderful, and we're very glad you were able to actually join us. All
I'm
right.
more glad than you are, I'm sure. I mean, it's lovely. I'm glad I can see it later.
Great. All right. Our next speaker, Peggy, welcome.
Hi, Letecia. Hi, everybody. Jen. Well, it's really good to be here. Letecia, you mentioned that my work with the women from the South, the network Dawn, was one of the most significant experiences in my life, personally, professionally, politically. And so what I want to share with you is that experience and what I learned from it, specifically in terms of what gifts can we offer from that experience from the South, from women from the South organizing. What gifts can we offer as we move forward to re-energize, reignite, strengthen some kind of women's organizing, feminist organizing, as we go forward to confront the enormous problems that we're facing today, from climate change to wars, to threats of wars, to economic inequality, everything else. So I want to start by placing that experience in the context, a particular context. And of course, the context I'm going to choose is the context of the United Nations. Whatever we think of the United Nations today, there was a time when the United Nations provided a really important space for dialogues at the international level about what was happening and what kind of future we wanted. In the 1960s and 70s, all the newly independent countries became members of the United Nations, and they formed their own group to give a voice so that their voices could be heard, to not just the voices from the North, as Paola said, not people from the North coming to tell us what to do. They found their own voice, and their voice was a voice that spoke of equity, of the need for a new international economic order. And I like to think of the fact that the United Nations designating 1975 as International Women's Year came in the middle of that decade, which was the decade of the 70s, where for the first time, governments from the South are having a voice. And for the first time, women of the world had an opportunity to come together at this incredible conference in Mexico City in 1975. So I'd like Diane to show the slide. I think it's the second slide, where we talk about the United Nations Decade for Women. So in 1975, in Mexico City, we had the first UN Conference of Women in Mexico City. And for the first time, women from all around the world were able to come together in a space that focused on our own experiences from wherever we came, our own experiences. But what was most important was that people that went to Mexico City in 1975 were coming from their own movements for many decades. So it's not as if 1975 was the beginning of anything. It was a moment in time that brought women from very diverse movements, women who had been involved in the anti-colonial movement, women in the anti-apartheid movement, women speaking for indigenous rights from all over the world for the first time to share their experiences with each other. Somebody has called this conference the greatest consciousness-raising event in history. And I think it's a good description because we've been talking about consciousness raising as a feminist methodology of sharing experiences. I want to say that what followed was a series of conferences. So maybe the people that designated 1975 International Women's Year thought, well, that would be the end of that. You know, we give women a year and after that, maybe they won't trouble us anymore. But that was just the beginning. So there had to be a decade for women. They then went from a year to a decade. And in that decade, the first conference in Mexico City was followed by a second conference in Copenhagen in 1980, and then a third conference in Nairobi in 1985. And Jen mentioned the way in which the numbers simply grew exponentially. In each of those conferences, there was a parallel forum, which was known as a non-governmental forum. In the case of Mexico City, it was actually called the Tribune. And so you had official conferences with government delegations, but then you also had the non-governmental conferences in which women were free to, and that is really where you saw feminist organizing and feminist flowering. So my main point about those United Nations conferences, it gave the women from the South an opportunity to speak for ourselves. The third conference in Nairobi was where Jen set up her peace tent, an example of the way in which women from different countries and continents brought their own struggles to that international arena. The next slide. So as we prepared for the 1985 conference in Nairobi, in 1975, a group of women were invited to meet in India, in Bangalore. And the invitation came from a wonderful Indian woman called Devaki Jain. And what she did was simply to invite to her home in Bangalore the women she had met over the years at these international conferences. The international conferences provide an opportunity for women to meet each other again and again and again and to work together. And so she brought a group of us together from the Pacific, from Asia, from Latin America, from Africa, from the Caribbean, to share their experiences of the decade. You know, the question was, what had we learned about women's lives in the past 10 years of the decade? So we didn't come with documents, with research papers, we came with our own experience. And in that very informal setting, which was a kind of again, consciousness raising, if you want to put it in feminist terms, we talked about what had been going on in our particular region during those 10 years. And the women from the Pacific talked about the testing of nuclear weapons and the environmental degradation that happened, that women were giving birth to jellyfish babies. They were talking about the fact that they couldn't even discuss this damage that was being done to them because there was some of the islands of the Pacific were still colonies. So the way in which neocolonialism prevented people from having their own voice and taking charge of their own lives. The women from Asia talked about religious fundamentalism. And in those two areas, I'd never thought before, as a woman coming from the Caribbean, I'd never thought before that militarism and environmental degradation and religious fundamentalism had anything to do with women's lives. Simply not part of my experience from the Caribbean. Then the women from Africa were talking about the terrible drought that was taking place in the Sahel and the people dying of starvation. And the women from Latin America were talking about something called structural adjustment policies, a policy framework that was really very detrimental to the lives of women, particularly the lives of poor women. a policy framework that cut social services, that cut subsidies to the poor, and that expected women to fill those gaps created by those cuts in social services. Now, I had heard about structural adjustment before I went to Bangalore in 1984, because just around that time, in June of that year, our governments in the Caribbean had announced that structural adjustment was going to be the framework for Caribbean development. We hadn't a clue, and I don't think the governments ever talked about what those policies meant, what that framework meant. But here in Bangalore, I heard for the first time from women in Latin America, this is what it is really involved in those policies. And of course, when we talked about what was happening in our particular region, the word crisis emerged as a theme, but the crises were all different. But the more we talked about these different crises, the more we saw that they were all in fact connected, and they were all connected to a particular economic model, which at that time was like the growth model, a model of development that privileged growth above everything else. So we did our platform document, and we went to Kenya, and we had a series of workshops, and they were all called feminism and whatever, feminism and debt, feminism and that was interesting, because up to that time, feminism was thought of as a North American word, synonymous with white middle-class women, bra burning, man-hating, a very negative understanding of feminism. But here was a group of women from the South who was claiming that word and saying, look, there are many feminisms, but our feminism has to take account of the fact that we are from the South, it has to take account of poverty, it has to take account of militarism, it has to take account of racism, it has to take account of government policies. It's not a feminism that can just focus on our lives as women. We have to look at our lives in the context of our communities, our countries. So the network was launched in the following year, and the way we conceptualized that network in the beginning just made no sense at all. So we got together again in 1990, and we said, look, what we thought of doing, the way we had structured this network in 1986 made absolutely no sense. So let us start again. So we started again by looking at what was going on in the world, and we said the United Nations was about to launch a series of conferences, not women's conferences this time, but a series of conferences on, and can I get the next slide? Yes. Starting with the Children's Summit, then there was to be the Earth Summit in 1992, then the Conference on Human Rights, then the Conference on Population and Development. Then in 1995, there was a Social Summit in Copenhagen, and then the third World Conference on Women in Beijing. And we decided in 1990 that we would use those events to focus our attention on that particular issue from the perspective of poor women living in the South. And so our methodology was, again, somebody writes a concept paper, somebody who knows a lot about the issue, and then they would go around to every region so that every region could critique and comment on that concept paper, and out of that would come an analysis of the issue that would be the basis for our advocacy at the conference. In the case of the Earth Summit, I think the particular thing that women from the South brought to that was that you cannot separate a discussion about the environment from a discussion on development. And at that time, in 1992, there had been a series of negotiations around the issue of trade for the Uruguay round, and that was coming to an end. And there was a parallel set of negotiations about climate. And there was no way that the governments did not connect those two things, but the women connected them. The women from the South connected them. And we said, basically, if the trade negotiations succeed, we can just forget about anything that might come out of the summit, because economic interests always come before environmental interests. So I think that is what we offered to that debate. Then in the case of the population conference, I often think of the population conference as a conference where the best example of how feminist organizing, not just from the South, but in alliance with our sisters in the North, led to a real change in the way in which people viewed a particular topic. So we mobilized in the South, and one of the interesting things that happened, I said before, we really looked at the differences between the regions. In the case of population, the women from Latin America were really focused on reproductive rights. That was their thing. And the women from Africa were saying, that's fine, but we really want to focus on health. And in that space of Dawn, we were able to see that you could not separate rights from health, and you could not separate health services from rights, and that you would have to have resources, you would have to have money to pay for health services. So we brought that kind of analysis, working with our sisters from the North. The other innovative thing that happened in the cases we prepared for Cairo is that we did a political analysis. We figured out which governments were allies and which were not. And we wanted to make sure, more important than anything else, that on the delegations, you would have people from ministries of health, because we could not depend on the diplomats. The diplomats have their own concerns, and they're not the concerns of women. What came out of that population conference was a completely new paradigm, a paradigm that focused on health, rights, women's empowerment, and the resources to actually provide those services that women were calling for.
5 minutes, Peggy, 5 minutes.
Okay, so the next slide. So I want to just quickly highlight the elements in Dawn's analytical framework, and I won't discuss them because I don't have time. So the perspective of poor women living in the South is important because we recognize that women are different, and the experience of poor women was very different from that of middle-class women. Regional diversity, really important. The analysis had to be holistic. So not just intersectional, race, class, and gender, but intersectoral, that is social, economic, political. We also said that you had to make a link between the macro framework and the micro experience of women on the ground. We recognize that every issue is a political issue. This idea that these are not political issues. Every issue is a political issue because every issue has at its heart the issue of power. And of course, feminist, meaning you have to link the experience in the household to the experience in the economy, the personal to the political, etc. Next slide. So what did we learn? What is it we want to offer as women from the South? So I think, first of all, we want to offer some concepts. And I want to say that Dawn was the first network that I saw come up with the concept of empowerment. And for Dawn, empowerment of women was through their organizations, not empowerment as it's used today to say you empower women by giving them an education or by making sure that they have health care. No, empowerment was what we get when we work together. That's empowerment. Then I think that the issue of the crisis in social reproduction, Paola mentioned the European feminists talking about the issue of social reproduction. I think what Dawn did was to bring that into a political economy, a feminist political economy analysis, so that we saw that these cuts in social services and the crisis in food and the crisis in energy all led to a crisis in social reproduction, relating it to the ability to reproduce ourselves, to take care of ourselves and our children. The value of diversity, I've already said that, and it's not that we just recognize diversity, we seek it out. We actually seek it out because it's the only way to get the kind of in-depth analysis that we need. I've already said about the analysis. I go on to understanding linkages. I think what Dawn's organizing highlighted was the importance of organizing at the local level, at the regional level, and bringing that to the international level, and then going back from the international back to the local level. The coalition and alliance building, I think the most important thing I want to say about that, because many people talk about building coalitions and alliances, but for Dawn, we have to identify some non-negotiables, okay? So we want to be very clear about what we are not prepared to give up. In that particular context of the 90s, I think our non-negotiable was reproductive rights, that we're not going to negotiate around that. And then preparing young feminists for advocacy. Vaughan has these training institutes every couple of years. And what is important about these training institutes is that we do a combination of what are the issues and the analysis, but then what are the strategies? What are the strategies we use in our advocacy? And finally, I want to end with the politics of friendship. I don't think we talk enough about that. You know, without those friendships that were developed in the course of the decade, we wouldn't have the Dawn Network. Without the friendships that developed during those 10 years of the 1990s, the decade of the 90s, where we built our relations of trust, where we worked together, really, as we confronted those structures of power, only our friendships enabled us to do what we did, and to do it with joy, with a lot of fun, with a lot of purpose, supporting each other. And I want to take us right back to what this international maternal gift economy network is all about. That represents friendship, because Jen, just as Devaki Jane did in 1984, that started the Dawn Network, Jen Vaughan has brought together a group of people that she knows well, and over time, we have just, through friendship, developed the trust that could lead to the kind of session that we had last Saturday. Those of you who were there last Saturday know that we were tackling a very, very difficult issue of Gaza, and it was the friendships and the trust that had developed over years of working together that enabled us to resolve some of those differences. So I want to end my presentation by, I think the most important gift we're giving from the South was the friendship that we gave to each other, and the recognition that friendship is the basis for the kind of politics we want to take forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Diane, would you please put up, is it the first slide Marta was asking for before she closes, the first of the slides? I think they wanted to see, Diane, the timeline again, if we can do that just for a beat.
And then the other timeline, the conferences. Yeah. The conferences of the 90s. The conferences of the 90s. I think that is, yeah, that's it. Is that it, Martha? I think that's Martha Benavides.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
One of the women very involved in these struggles. Hi, Martha.
Yes.
Nice to see you. Yeah.
Exactly. So I want to say again how honored we are to actually have you present this. And for those of you who are viewing with us today and in the future, I want to just reiterate, this is a slice. As all three speakers, including Jen, the fourth speaker, pointed out, that it was women's experiences. It was both outside of the governmental pathways where a lot of this consciousness raising was done. And then women would go into these other spaces of governance and academia and all phases of industries to have an effect from a feminist point of view. And we are living the fruits of their labors. So I want to give a big thank you for all of your work. And it is through the friendships. It's through the International Feminists for the Gift Economy and Jen's galvanizing heart voice that brought us all together. So Jen, I wonder if you have any words that you'd like to offer before we actually open up to questions.
Well, yes, thank you all. Thank you, Peggy, very much. And thank you, Angela and Paola. This gives me so much hope. And all of the terrible things that are happening in the world now, and that look like they're happening for the future, but we have these networks. We have this experience. It has existed on the face of the earth, this feminist consciousness, an alternative to the wars and the destruction. So we need to put our faith there and our hope there and continue it, because it can make the change. That's my prayer and my belief. So
Thank you so much. And I want to just really do point out, part of the reason that we collect here is Peggy pointed out that what is necessary, and our friend Heidi Gutner-Abendroth says that it is the economic sphere that's really essential to allow for women to be able to actually have their voice be heard and make the changes that are necessary so that no children are killed by wars in the future. So with that, I want to open the floor to the questions, and we have with us Judith and Liliana. So let's start with Liliana. Do you have a question for us?
Yes, I have a question for all the panelists. It's from Maria Suarez. If you had to write a half-page testament to the younger generation of women and men about what it is the legacy that the feminist movement of the last 50 years leaves to them, what would you say? Should I repeat it?
No, well, I think they got it.
Okay,
but yes, I think they got it. And you could give your first thought, because that's a lot to condense down. So who would like to, and perhaps that could be an anthology, Maria, and you could ask for the people to submit their half page to you, or we could post it on the website. So Paola, would you like to
Unmute.
see if you can unmute, Paola? No?
I'd like to
There you go.
hear some more questions, because the legacy, I mean, this is the beginning of our discussion. I would like to warm it up, and then I would want to do this. Like,
Okay, come back to that. You want to come back to that question towards the end.
I want to warm up what comes from the people there too.
Okay. Well, let's check in with Judith and see if she has a question.
There's a question from Patricia White, whether anyone has any information about the wife ships which came to the shores of Turtle Island. She says this is part of our history, and it's really hard to find information about it. So does any of you, it wasn't part of your talk, but does any of you know about the wife ships?
No, I think that that's probably a historical thing. I can say that World War II, my mother came over on a wife ship. There were several boats that brought wives after World War II of servicemen that came. But early on, I don't. We'll have to find out more about that. And thanks for bringing up that question. All right, let's check in with Liliana and see if she has another question.
Yes, I have a question from Tracy Gary, and it's to Paola. And she would like for Paola to add more dates and the phases that she spoke about, and the phases when she spoke.
I started with the 70s. Where are you? I can do that now to put a flavor. I started with the 70s, and in a way I stayed in the 70s and the 80s. Let me see what I cut off. as the moment where there was the, how can I say, the coming to light of the main issues that would later be developed. So in a way, in the 70s, in my opinion, the main themes, the main issues were already there. Then there was the history of them. And then I don't know if I said something about, but I think I was mainly staying in the framework of the 70s. Because it's there that started all the different paths. And then these paths continued. So I was highlighting key points, key issues that became developed later. So this is why I didn't give, I said that our movement started basically in the 70s, and then I didn't give specific dates, unless you can ask me about which dates of what. But all these were developing in different moments, but were stated, were coming to light during those years. Apart perhaps, as we had Chernobyl, I didn't talk about that because I had no time, but the 87 and Chernobyl catastrophe and the war in Yugoslavia that fell as a complete surprise on our heads started another path of reflection around the linkages between the private violence and the war, the violence against women in wars, and the patriarchal mind, we are saying, that expresses itself in wars. So that part had specific dates, which are Chernobyl and the Yugoslavia and the war in Yugoslavia. But for the rest, I mean, I can give the dates of a book, but I wouldn't give a dates of these developments. It was the decade of the 70s.
Thanks, Paola. I also want to just interject here that this will be the first of a few on the topic of feminisms in the 50 years and forward. So this is our first. There'll be others. So I don't want you to feel pressured that your questions may not be answered in this particular forum, this particular salon. So let's go back to, was it Liliana or Judith? I think it's Judith. Do you have a question first, Judith?
There's a question about the human trafficking, the human trafficking industry. C.J. Roberts of the U.S. Supreme Court cited with approval the American Adoption Congress in overturning Roe v. Wade that abortion is problematic because it cut into the domestic infant supply chain, and it's a $24 billion a year industry and funds the anti-choice and anti-women's movements. So comments on the human trafficking as one of the issues of the women's movement.
Yes, Peggy.
Yeah, I want to go beyond trafficking, because if you look at that statement, what you see very clearly is an attempt to reassert patriarchal control over women, basically. There's a big issue now because of demographic changes all over the world that because of a falling population, reductions in fertility, women are not having as many babies as before. There's now a real effort to try and force women to have babies. Mind you, some women to have babies. And so I think we have to look behind what is present in that statement. Of course, we have to be concerned about trafficking, and there's a lot of work going on, anti-trafficking work. But I just want to alert us to look out for, for the efforts that a lot of efforts being made now with, the right wing is in charge, right-wing politics, right-wing and using religion to try and see behind words like that.
Thanks, Peggy. Judith, can you say more about that question?
Someone else put in human trafficking and women who are enslaved internationally. So the whole question of the movement of women internationally and nationally, and how that what is a feminist response.
Yeah. And so probably that's related to the question of whether it's important to recognize the rights of individual women and the agency of individual women to choose that, or whether we need more structural and collective responses to getting a world where we don't have that, or it's to do with perspectives and stuff like that, I think, and that's important. I think that's a piece of the friendship piece. The friendships, the powerful friendships, are based on deep understandings and shared visions and values, if not shared priorities always, or shared analyses, or doesn't rule out, but it means that those friendships are deeply connected to the personal and political, as Peggy says, and that's perspectives. And I think that's something that's important in terms of the diversity. What are the bases of feminist vision or hope or understanding that we need each other, women? We need each other because nobody's on our side except women, and we need to see the connections, and that we need analyses of all the many elements that Peggy named, and that's. But the friendship piece, one of the things that I think is really important, and we might not want to get it into it here, but I think it's important to bear in mind maybe for future discussion, is how have the situations changed? What are we what the wonderful, so interesting to hear, Peggy, your account of Devaki Jane and those kind of friendships, those kind of real rooted friendships. Where are the venues now that would bring so many women from so many globally and issue different oriented places to learn from each other and to teach each other and to organize together? That I think since the 95 almost, it's not long after Beijing, there's been a real fear of trying to use UN spaces as places to do that work, because if there's anything really big on the agenda to be decided, the shift with neoliberalism and the shift to such power by corporations and the fundamentalisms, including economic fundamentalisms, are so powerful now that opening up global spaces to push and get stuff on the agenda through UN contexts is not, doesn't necessarily provide the space, and other differences now. I know in those in earlier periods, as feminists were excited and learning so much together, just seeing the world so differently and really telling each other what they understood and what their lives were like, and learning, as Peggy described, about issues in different regions and for different women in differently located. That kind of energy and growing awareness, the excitement is huge and is energizing, and and getting at deep questions and sharing visions, not blueprints, but ideas of let's be human and not the way the men have defined the human. What about young feminists who grow up knowing that they're women, that it isn't equal, that there's a lot of violence against women, that women are not facilitated, but it's not a big eye open. It's not like, oh my gosh, the period of developing feminisms when women in all located in many ways, class-wise and regionally and so on, we're suddenly realizing that, you know what, it is really stacked, and it's not true that when a woman's raped, it's not smart, it's not good if you think, well, what was she doing walking there? Or, well, what was she wearing? And if a male boss, 40 years old, has an affair with his secretary, well, there, what was she tempting him? And and the idea that women took a free ride on their husbands because the man was working, she was just sitting at home, and she spent his money. So my God, there was a thing in the US, momism, as a big problem. Momism was that women rule too much because they did too much of the shopping. And I mean,
Yeah. Thanks, Angela.
Insights. And now,
Yeah.
young women, I'm wondering what the relationship to feminism, or the experience in one's life, and where is the excitement, and related to Peggy's point about the intersectional. It was an integrative, growing understanding when doing this consciousness raising, this kind of learning, this kind of sharing, and presuming that the analysis would come out of that process. Now we have experts. We have expert feminist researchers and writers and people who then we read a book about it. So
thanks, Angela. I think maybe we can hear from some of the other presenters on
future discussion.
Who want to follow up. So let's take it in order. Peggy had her hand up first, then we'll go to Paola, and then we'll go to Jen.
Yeah, the question that came before Angie started to talk, and a question from Tracy about the UN. What spaces can we use? I would say absolutely not the UN right now. It is not a space that is open enough for women, but there are many other spaces. There is a group called AWID, Association for Women in Development, and they're having a conference fairly soon, and there may be many others having conferences, but it's the non-governmental spaces that we have to use right now, because one of the things I would say to young women is that don't depend on your governments. I mean, I'm not saying that it isn't important to have people working within those spaces, but the change will only come from women outside of those formal governmental structures. So I just wanted to answer Tracy's question that way, and somebody else had raised a question about the UN. That's it.
Thanks, Peggy. Paola?
Yeah, I think the conferences of the 90s were the best political example of political women, feminist politics, because really we experimented there a combination of in and out on lobby and pressure and the results, and being completely autonomous in our perspectives that we never re-experimented in any political arena, because really in the best in a way was really the Cairo one. And there we had also the Gro Brundtland was there, so you saw that also the political space of somebody in high post in a way was key to open the space for all the political pressure of women. Gro Brundtland on attacking relativism was absolutely fundamental. So we saw the interplay, an ideal, in my opinion, if I think now, interplay between the movements and the possibility to change the agendas and to reach institutional results. This is one thing. The second, I want to add another thing about friendship, and that goes to the legacy. I think it's more than friendship in a way. In the first consciousness raising groups that we said that there was the birth of an foreseen subject. The conscious raising groups legitimized a certain personal knowledge, like I was saying that before, like a real knowledge that could confront with all its power the academic settings. And I think it was something having to do with motherhood, in the sense that, and that was what the very interesting analysis of this consciousness that I want to share was perceived as we perceived it now. It was creating a group of women where every woman was looking at the other woman as a mother, not praising the boy, but praising an intelligence that came from a woman's body. So it was a different look of a mother to another woman, which legitimized this joy. We were many women, the poor, so to say, the poor women that we were working together in the periphery of Milan were saying, this is like having a new birth, in the sense that it was for the first time the possibility to think of themselves in a completely different way, self-legitimized, but it was the group who legitimized this. And I think our Wednesday group, if you think of the energy that is in that group, all of a sudden last time after Gaza, I thought this is the same spirit of the beginning of feminist knowledge that was conscious raising, even if the form is different, but the energy that goes is recognizing through a mother and woman eye what you say and giving it value that can stand the times and the various institutions. So in my opinion, it's more than friendship, it's a special friendship. And so the legacy, and so I'm finishing with that. I think one of the points of the legacies would be that through this kind of attitude and using this production of knowledge in the, let's say, exemplified in various groups, we continues exerts a critical thinking which is not allowing anything to be passed as natural, as obvious, that nobody can do anything, that is obvious, that is like that. So the analysis of war, of violence, for example, that is still, in my opinion, not, is so painful that I don't think we can even go very much. But the analysis of violence needs deeper work. And it's in this never giving anything as natural that we have to ask the new generation never to give up this attitude, because today it's one of the main threats, I think, for going forward in our work.
Thank you, Paola. Jen?
Yeah, thank you, Paola. You're talking about those consciousness raising groups, takes me back there and reminds me, refreshes my own experience of some of that and how important it is. But what I wanted to just mention was about the trafficking of women and how that brings up the combination of patriarchy and capitalism, patriarchy and the market. And we really need to analyze patriarchy and the market together. So as part of the exchange-based and gift exploiting system. So that I just am putting that into the pot here to So we think of it.
Thanks, Jen. I think it's really important to stir the pot, as you've been called often a pot stirrer. So, and I want to say also, Paula referred to our Wednesday group, and I just want to give a little insight into what that's about. When COVID happened, the International Feminists for the Gift Economy all over the world sort of convened in a Zoom room. And we have been meeting every week, sometimes twice a week. And we've strengthened our relationships and had very, very deep discussions. Sometimes it's actually a teach-in, but I want to encourage you all, we have these platforms. So, call your women together and organize as Peggy said, locally, and then in your communities, then in your country, and then internationally, which is at the level that we have come to. We all have our own personal local groups that we actually attend to. Angela M.
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the friendship piece, and I think that the thing about the consciousness raising, or the thing about, is that was sharing experience. That was learning about what the world's like from many different angles. But the whole basis was you shared in order to analyze. That was what you were doing together, was figuring out how come that beauty queen who was so lovely in class and just got all the attention, how come she wasn't happy? Hey, she wasn't actually enjoying her life. Think just what does that mean? Think about the relationship with our mothers and why sometimes it's so difficult in a patriarchal. So, and then you do the integral kind of looking at all of the systems. So the friendship is really an important part of that. And I think that analysis that's a known as part of consciousness raising. You share this stuff because you're going to do an analysis. You're going to really listen, and it's going to be completely open, like Paola says. But that there's friendships, deep friendships are really, really powerful. The thing in terms of situations now, back in earlier decades, the really powerful contributions in terms of the writing that people was reading and things that were influencing, I think, feminists, all wrote critically from their own center of a many-centered movement and presumed to speak of relevance to everyone. So the analyses showed shared shared interests among apparently different women. And I'm thinking of Adrienne Rich's analysis of enforced heterosexuality. That was an analysis of enforced heterosexuality as it limited all women. And it kept every woman in line who didn't want to be considered a lesbian. And it kept the lesbians at risk. So nobody's winning there. That was the kind of thing that was being talked about, and there were many all the groups, radical lesbians, spoke about loving women and respecting women. All of us had to do that. There were tendencies that said if you're going to sleep with a man, you're sleeping with the enemy. I'm not saying, but however, the feminist lesbians were talking about we had to be loyal to women, and we all needed to do that. The Disabled Women's Network, when they're making a critique that the movement isn't responsive, isn't dealing with things. I have quotes here. They're saying, "We are your sisters." They're saying this isn't feminism. This is no good if you don't take this on. We are with you. There's a quote from Welfare Warriors I have, that's a group of poor mothers, and they have very, very eloquently about the situation of poor women, and they say that they're probably the most globally diverse group, and their situation, their vulnerability shows us what all mothers can face if they don't have men. It shows the vulnerability, the dependence. Their situation is our situation, and so on and so forth. So that there was the insistence, and sometimes difficult insistence, on hearing from women was all spoken from the center of the movement to the movement as a whole. And the differences, the intersectionalities were not, they were integral, because all of the situations of women in all the different contexts with different power, different resources is linked. And those were some of the understandings and the achievements of seeing that in a world where we're not supposed to see it. And I think that's a different context today, as far as what's written around the differences among us and particular vulnerabilities of specific groups. It's important in terms of how we can use the spaces that there are.
Thanks, Angela. Jen, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about places where we can meet. And this is one. Anyone can actually get a Zoom room and ask their friends to meet, and friends of friends. And you can, it's a very good way to be able to meet very, very conveniently. And you can also come to ours, but if you want to do your own, you can.
That's a great reminder, Jen. Yes. Paola, are you pointing or wanting to speak?
I would say now that we can retake, before, as you say, there are no more questions and we are towards the end, we can retake Maria question about the legacy.
Okay.
Yeah, the question was, if you had to write a half-page testament to the younger generation of women and men about what is it, the legacy that the feminist movement of the last 50 years leaves them, what would you say?
And if you don't have a comment to that you can actually say out loud, I want to invite you to actually leave a closing statement, because I noticed that there's been so much conversation. I knew this was going to spark a lot of a conversation, that perhaps you can have a closing statement if you couldn't, in a short amount of time, provide something that made sense to that question. A paragraph is more than, a minute. So if you wanted to, yes, Angela.
Okay, yeah, I think one very, very important lesson is the local to global connections. The population and health conference that Peggy mentions, and the human rights conference at the UN, that organizing was very local to global. There was local organizing around all those issues in those conferences. And that was huge, because it impacted the localities, and it made that global movement a global movement, not just for the ones who could go to those international meetings, but the participants there from the feminist movement were all local links, and millions of signatures went to the Human Rights Conference, gathered all over the world locally, at a time when you didn't have any internet or anything. Everybody had to sign a petition. You have to put these millions of signatures into boxes and haul them around. That was transformative around in all the locations, as well as having an impact on framing what are human rights in a big way. Big changes there.
Thanks, Angela. Jen.
Yeah, I think that we need as a feminist movement now, and as our gift economy, maternal gift economy movement, we need to look at the people of the future, of the children of the future, and realize that they are going to be in terrible trouble, probably, from the environment and from patriarchy as it continues, if it's not changed. And so we need to form a wide movement of women who care about the children now and in the future, and find ways of making it easier for them if it's possible. And to realize that we care, for them to realize that we're not abandoning.
Thank you, Jen. Paola, do you have a closing statement or a response to Maria's question? Either would be
already
good.
responded to Maria's question at the end of my intervention before, but I would say inside this statement of never giving anything for granted as natural, that what worries me in a way, and I would ask the young people, because you gave me this idea, the young people to pay attention that inside these movements against climate change, against war, there is a scarce visibility of the specific approach of women, the specific look of women. So to see, to highlight and make more visible the specificity of women look approach to that, I think it's today very important. And it's a legacy of our methodologies, because it's becoming very mixed, very, the movement, the climate, the war, anti-war is very mixed, which is okay. But the analysis that women do of violence or the specificity of climate, they are becoming more and more invisible in a way.
Thanks, Paola. Peggy.
Yeah. So I'm just agreeing with Angie and Paola, and just adding, and Jen. I think this is what I would say to young women. First of all, I mean, I'm assuming that you're talking about young women who want to change the world, who are unhappy about the way things are going. The first thing is to find other women like yourself. And I do agree that you have to start with your own consciousness raising group. I think that if you're going to be an activist, you have to have a small group of women that you trust, who are your friends, who will have your back, but more importantly, who will give you feedback and say, this is, yes, Peggy, but women you can trust. You need a small group, and then you widen that circle, but start with the consciousness raising. Because as Paola says, specifically, what is our experience as women? And you start with that. But I just want to say something, that you have to take that consciousness raising a little further than just yourself. In your consciousness raising, that's why it's more like conscientization, the Freirean thing, where you take your own experience, but you try to relate it to the larger framework of what's going on around, and try to understand that in terms of your own self. So that's where you get the intersectionality and the intersectoral, etc. So you start with the consciousness raising about the self, you go further and see how that relates to the larger structures. So really try to understand the large issues, even as you focus on your particular one. If you understand the large issues, you know that there are other groups that are working on different things, and you want to become their allies. You want to be in solidarity with them. So you may not be working on Gaza, but you want to be in solidarity with other people that are working on those issues. But the most important thing is to, I think, understand that the struggle is ongoing. A lot of the things that I spent all my time and energy working on in the 1990s and achieving, a lot of that has been reversed. A lot of that has been reversed. And to know that the struggle is continuous, it'll come back again. And it's your turn to reignite that flame and that passion for justice. The struggle for justice is always ongoing. Take nothing for granted, but work with the only way to confront the power structures is the power with other women and to find that power within yourself. So take care of yourself first, and then find your sisters, and then together, organizing with other people, you could then confront the big structures.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peggy. I want to mention again that we couldn't possibly address all of your questions, and I know that there will be more. I'm hoping that there will be more questions. We will post the chat with the recording of this session at our website, the maternalgifteconomymovement.org. We are so happy that you joined us today. I want to thank Genevieve, Vaughan, Peggy, Paola, and Angela for your presentations. And Angela, just grateful that you were resilient and tenacious, that you insisted on coming here because your voice was really critical to this group of women. And I want to encourage you women who are listening, and men too, because feminists are also male and all other genders, that we welcome you to join us in the future. I want to thank Diane, our ever steady tech support and timekeeper. She has the most difficult job of interrupting our wonderful speakers. Liliana and Judith, thank you for paying attention to both the chat and the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to more of them. And on behalf of the International Feminists for the Gift Economy, I want to thank you sincerely. Each of you is doing your part in actually bringing forward this feminist agenda, and we can't make this shift without you. I want to mention again that our recording will be up at the maternalgifteconomymovement.org. If you have additional questions or want to contact us, feel free to write to us at maternalgifteconomy@gmail.com. We'll have our next salon in 2 weeks, Saturday, February the 10th. Jen, can you give us insight into what's brewing?
Yes, just because it's near Valentine's Day, well, we decided to do it about love, but this is the love for the people, love for nature, revolutionary love, feminist love for changing society for the better. So that's what it's going to be. And we'll have a poet and a singer who will talk about it and recite and sing about it.
Beautiful. I'm looking forward to that. The salon after that, on the 24th, we will have Mickey Kashkan and Vonda, I can't remember her last name. This is a follow-up to our network of networks. This is the strong, sort of outflowing of these very deep roots in feminism and organizing. And we want to invite you to continue with us on this journey. And thank you so much for spending this time with us on your Saturday. All right. So with that, my speaker friends, Judith, Diane, and Liliana, just have your voice be heard and say goodbye to everyone. Until next time, my friends, be safe, be well, be kind to one another, and help us reach that ideal of world peace, stopping war. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.